Man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health. There comes a moment when the silence around you begins to speak louder than all the noise you've been using to fill your days. You can be surrounded by people, by goals, by noise, and still feel like something essential has gone missing. It's not depression, it's recognition. A quiet realization that you've been living but not alive. That somewhere deep inside, a wiser part of you has been waiting for your attention. You can sense it in your body, in that restlessness that no success can soothe. You can sense it when a random song moves you to tears, or when your dreams begin to repeat the same symbols, as if something or someone inside you is trying to remind you of a forgotten promise. Jung would say that this is not a crisis to fix, but a beginning of a conversation. The moment when consciousness starts to turn inward, when the ego is summoned back to the soul. He called it the process of individuation, the lifelong task of becoming who you truly are, beyond the masks you wear, beyond the expectations you inherited. That emptiness you feel is not a punishment. It's a message, a subtle vibration from the depths of your own psyche whispering, it's time. Because the soul does not shout, it calls. It doesn't rush, it waits. And while the world teaches you to build your worth through achievements, the soul asks a different question. Who are you when nothing outside defines you? That's why the moments that break you are not random. They are sacred interruptions, designed to wake you from the hypnosis of routine, the job loss, the breakup, the burnout. Each of them is an initiation in disguise, a symbolic death meant to awaken a deeper life. In Jung's words, the soul is not just something we possess, it is something that possesses us. When you begin to feel that truth, you realize that your suffering is a pattern, that it's not chaos, but communication. The unconscious doesn't speak through logic. It speaks through symbols, coincidences, sensations, and dreams. The same recurring image, the same person who appears in different forms, the same emotion that never fades. All of it is language. The question is not why it's happening, but what it's trying to reveal. And maybe that's why the more you resist, the louder life becomes. You start noticing synchronicities, numbers repeating, songs playing at the exact moment you need them, random words that pierce your heart as if they were written for you. These are not coincidences. They are echoes of what Jung called the autonomous psyche, the living reality of the soul, trying to guide you back to your center. Every symptom of emptiness, every strange alignment, every fragment of déjà vu is an invitation to remember what you once knew before you came here. Because there was a wisdom within you long before you learned to speak, and it still lives beneath your fears, beneath your roles, beneath the person you think you are. The problem begins when the ego, terrified of losing control, tries to silence that voice. It clings to certainty, to logic, to performance, pretending that the ache inside can be fixed by more doing, more proving, more distraction. But the soul is patient. It waits for the day when your mind finally grows tired of fighting what your heart already knows. And when that day comes, you'll realize that nothing was ever missing, only ignored. The longing, the anxiety, the exhaustion, they were never enemies. They were messengers. The soul was speaking the only language it could, the language of feeling, of breakdown, of mystery. Because when we forget what the soul once knew, life itself begins to translate the message to the only medium left, through the body, through fate, through the gentle and sometimes painful whisper of the symptom. Before you had a name, before you took your first breath, something within you already carried a memory older than time. Jung believed that the psyche does not enter the world as a blank page. It arrives already written upon, inscribed with patterns, myths, and symbols that have shaped human experience for millennia. He called this deep reservoir the collective unconscious, a common psychic substrate of a superpersonal nature that exists in every individual. It means that beneath your personal story runs a river shared by all of humanity. Your soul didn't come here empty. It came carrying the code of existence itself. This is why certain symbols move you for reasons you can't explain. Why you feel drawn to specific places or people that seem strangely familiar. Why a story you've never heard before can make you cry as if it belonged to you. You're not responding to coincidence. You're responding to recognition. These are echoes from that deeper field where every human soul is connected, where memory is not linear but eternal. You've lived these archetypes through others long before you live them yourself. The hero's journey, the wounded healer, the betrayed lover, the wise old sage. These are not just characters and myths. They are living blueprints inside you. They awaken in moments of crisis or revelation, guiding you through experiences your conscious mind cannot yet make sense of. Jung called them archetypes, universal forms that shape the way the psyche perceives, feels, and creates meaning. Each one is both ancient and alive, like a symbol waiting to be rediscovered through your choices, your dreams, and your pain. Your soul speaks through these patterns. It maps your growth not through logic, but through symbols, images that appear in your imagination, in your dreams, in the rhythms of your relationships. It's not a map made of streets and directions, but of stories and emotions. When you meet someone and feel an instant bond, when you face a recurring challenge that feels strangely familiar, you are walking along that symbolic path. You're being reminded of something you came here to learn, something your soul knew before your mind forgot. This is why certain fears seem to have no beginning, and why certain loves feel infinite. They are archetypal threads woven through your personal life, asking to be seen, lived, and integrated. The anxiety that visits you before change is not an enemy. It's the ancient echo of every transformation that came before you. The yearning for meaning, for connection, for transcendence. These are not weaknesses. They are instinct of the soul reaching towards origin. When you dream of falling, of flying, of wandering through forgotten rooms, you are visiting those invisible corridors of the collective memory. The dream doesn't speak in literal terms. It speaks in images that belong to all humanity. The mountain you climb, the shadow that follows you, the light that appears at the end. These are languages your soul understands intuitively because it wrote them long before you arrived here. But the modern mind, ruled by the ego, often dismisses this inner cartography. It wants certainty, not mystery, control, not communion. It measures life by logic and outcomes, forgetting that the deeper intelligence guiding existence doesn't operate by the same laws. The ego says, I know who I am, but the soul whispers, you are still becoming. To ignore the map of the soul is to live disconnected from the river of meaning that runs beneath everything. It's to walk through life with eyes open but spirit asleep, repeating the same patterns, falling into the same relationships, facing the same lessons until awareness returns. Because the archetypes do not vanish when ignored. They repeat themselves, louder each time, until you remember their message. And that's where destiny begins to twist itself into a loop. Because when the ego decides it knows more than the soul, the future stops unfolding and starts repeating. Modern life has perfected the art of distraction. We've learned to build our worth from things that vanish the moment we stop performing. Titles, screens, routines, applause. These are the altars where the modern self goes to pray. But underneath all that motion, there's a quiet displacement happening. The soul, once the center of human experience, has been pushed to the margins. We are taught to trust only what we can measure, to believe only what we can see, and to dismiss whatever doesn't fit inside the logic of our calendars. We've built an empire of intellect and efficiency, and in the process, we've lost our connection to mystery. We identify so completely with our conscious persona that we forget it's just a fragment of something much larger. The ego becomes a ruler, the narrator, the one who believes it must control every outcome. Yet Jung warned that this kind of dominance is always temporary. The one-sidedness of consciousness, he wrote in The Nature of the Psyche, always creates a counterposition in the unconscious. The moment you crown the rational mind as absolute, you awaken its equal and opposite force in the depths. What has been denied does not disappear. It gathers strength, waiting for the moment to return. That return rarely looks gentle. It comes as the sleepless nights you can't explain, the fatigue that no rest can cure, the vague dissatisfaction that follows every achievement. You think you've failed, but you haven't. It's not failure, it's feedback. The psyche is trying to restore equilibrium. When consciousness goes too far in one direction, the unconscious compensates by pulling you toward what's missing. If you live only in control, it will drag you into chaos. If you worship productivity, it will paralyze you with exhaustion. If you chase perfection, it will show you your cracks until you learn to love them. We call these intrusion symptoms, but they are also symbols. The panic that tightens your chest may be the voice of a forgotten dream begging to breathe again. The apathy that dulls your days may be the soul's protest against a life stripped of meaning. Even the coincidences that startle you, the repeating numbers, the song that answers your thoughts, the stranger who says exactly what you needed to hear, are not random. They are small openings in the fabric of the ordinary, through which the unconscious whispers, "I am still here." The language of the soul is subtle but relentless. It doesn't use words, it uses experience. It speaks through the body, through the people you attract, through the patterns you repeat. It speaks in metaphors, just like dreams do. That's why Jung saw dreams not as nonsense, but as nightly letters from the deeper self. Letters written in a symbolic alphabet that only the heart can translate. Every image, every emotion, every impossible scene carries a piece of the truth the ego has forgotten. But the modern ego doesn't want dialogue. It wants dominance. It wants to fix, to label, to rationalize. It hears the whisper of the unconscious and calls it weakness. It feels the ache of emptiness and calls it illness. And so it builds higher walls, busier schedules, brighter screens, stronger defenses, believing that silence is the enemy. Yet the soul waits, patient and eternal, knowing that sooner or later, exhaustion will become the doorway, because no one can outrun themselves forever. The unconscious does not punish. It compensates. Its purpose is not destruction, but integration. It wants you whole. It wants you to remember that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the harmony between opposites. It wants you to hold light and shadow, logic and intuition, ambition and surrender, all as parts of one living organism called you. When you begin to understand this, your pain stops feeling like betrayal and starts feeling like guidance. Every discomfort becomes an invitation to listen instead of resist. And yet, what happens when we ignore that invitation for too long? When the distance between who we are and who we were meant to be becomes too vast. The unconscious will not disappear. It will manifest. What is repressed internally eventually appears externally. You'll meet it as recurrent relationships, as emotional breakdowns, as sudden accidents or synchronicities that shatter your plans. It's as if life itself conspires to push you back into alignment. Jung believed that when the ego refuses dialogue with the unconscious, fate becomes a teacher. The psyche, denied integration, will express itself through the events of your life until you finally stop to listen. So, the next time the world seems to crumble around you, ask yourself, what part of me have I silenced? What truth have I buried beneath busyness, beneath fear, beneath pride? Because when the separation between ego and soul stretches too far, life must intervene. It will dismantle the structures you built for survival, not to destroy you, but to bring you home. And that is the hidden danger of forgetting the soul. The longer the separation persists, the louder the universe must speak. Until one day, the voice you ignored all along, the one you thought you could silence, becomes impossible to escape. When the ego lives cut off from the soul, life becomes flat, busy on the surface but hollow underneath. You move, but not forward. You achieve, but you don't arrive. It's like running endlessly on a treadmill of shoulds and musts, mistaking movement for meaning. You build a career, a reputation, a carefully curated identity. But inside, something feels profoundly untouched. The outer world keeps growing, yet the inner world stays barren. That's what Jung called spiritual alienation, a state where a person appears functional but is secretly starving for essence. You can see it in the eyes of those who seem to have it all yet feel nothing. They followed every rule, checked every box, but still wake up with a quiet ache that whispers, "Is this it?" The tragedy is not that they failed. It's that they succeeded at becoming what the world wanted, while losing touch with what the soul needed. The rhythm of life becomes mechanical, transactional, predictable. Each day feels like a copy of the last, and even pleasure becomes another performance. In psychology and religion, Jung warned, when we do not find God within ourselves, we worship in the form of power. And that's the danger. When the soul's guidance is silenced, the ego looks for substitutes. It starts chasing reflections of divinity in all the wrong places, in relationships that promise salvation, in ideologies that offer certainty, in possessions that sparkle like temporary grace. The hunger for connection becomes a hunger for control. Instead of surrendering to meaning, we start consuming it. This is how spiritual emptiness disguises itself as ambition. You keep searching for the next thing that will fill the void. Another lover, another project, another belief system, another distraction. And for a moment, it works. You feel alive again, high on the illusion of purpose. But the feeling fades and the emptiness deepens, because what you're feeding isn't the soul, it's a void itself. The ego keeps expanding horizontally, accumulating experiences, knowledge, followers, yet vertically. It never descends into depth. That's why this age of constant motion feels so numb. The collective psyche has become addicted to progress without presence, light without shadow. We build temples to technology, but neglect the altar within. We scroll through thousands of images, but forget to see ourselves. We replace contemplation with consumption, and wonder why peace feels unreachable. The horizontal life looks full, but it has no center. It spins faster and faster around nothing. And the more disconnected we become, the more extreme our attempts to feel something. We turn spirituality into entertainment, love into transaction, faith into ideology. We worship systems, leaders, brands, anything that offers certainty in a world we no longer feel rooted in. But as Jung observed, power cannot redeem the human soul. It can only drain it. The more we project divinity outward, the more powerless we become within. The cost of this disconnection is subtle but devastating. Without a living connection to the soul, even beauty begins to lose meaning. You can stand before a sunset and feel nothing. You can hold someone's hand and still feel alone. You can achieve every external milestone and still feel like you're missing your life. Because you are. The ego is not evil, it's just incomplete. It was never meant to lead alone. And so, the symptoms of modern suffering multiply. Anxiety, overthinking, a constant need for validation. These are not random. They are the modern forms of worship, the rituals of an unconscious seeking God in everything except itself. We buy, we compare, we perform, hoping the applause will drown out the silence within. But silence doesn't disappear, it deepens. Yet, there's something sacred even in that emptiness. Because the void is not punishment, it's invitation. It is the space left behind when all false gods fail. It's the ache that calls you home. When everything external stops satisfying you, the inner world begins to whisper again. The same silence that once terrified you now becomes a doorway back to yourself. Jung discovered that beyond this alienation lies a hidden process, a way back from fragmentation to wholeness, a meeting point where the ego no longer fights the soul, but listens to it, a journey in which meaning is not found but remembered, because there's a path of return, a process where soul and self begin to recognize each other again, and life, for the first time, starts to make sense. Jung called this sacred return individuation, the process by which a person becomes who they truly are, not by adding more layers, but by peeling away everything that isn't essential. It is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. It is a soul's slow unfolding through the experiences that shape you, the symbols that haunt you, and the choices that awaken you. It begins quietly, almost invisibly, with simple act, listening. Listening to the intuition that interrupts your logic. Listening to the dream that keeps repeating itself. Listening to the emotion that doesn't make sense but refuses to leave. Individuation begins when you stop trying to fix yourself and start trying to understand yourself. It's the moment when you shift from asking, "What's wrong with me?" to "What does life try to teach me through this?" That question alone can turn suffering into initiation. The first stage is recognition, the humble admission that there is something beyond a rational mind, that your thoughts are not the whole of you, that the world within is just as vast and alive as the world outside. This recognition softens the ego's grip. It allows space for mystery, for intuition, for possibility that meaning might come from somewhere deeper than logic. Jung believed that this awareness is not a weakness. It's the beginning of maturity. To recognize the invisible is to begin seeing the whole. Then comes integration. This is where the dialogue begins, between consciousness and the unconscious, between the person you present and the one who dreams. Jung called the dream a direct communication from the unconscious, a means of expression that uses universal symbols, but in a personal way. Every dream, every image, Every irrational pull is an invitation to a conversation with the self, that deeper organizing principle within you. When you start to honor what arises from your depths, your fears, your desires, your shadow, you stop being haunted by them. You integrate them. You give the exiled parts of your psyche a seat at the table of awareness. Integration is not intellectual, it's experiential. It happens when you stop running from your emotions and start asking what they symbolize. When you see anger not as a flaw, but as a boundary. When you see sadness not as weakness, but as a call to feel again. When you start to decode your dreams, not as predictions, but as reflections of your soul speaking in metaphor. The symbol of water, for instance, might not mean danger, but emotion. A locked room might not be a nightmare, but an unopened part of you asking to be entered. From there, you move into conscious action. This is where inner awareness begins to change outer reality. The choices you make stop being driven by fear, approval, or habit, and start being guided by alignment. You no longer act to escape discomfort. You act to express truth. Living from the self means responding, not reacting, choosing, not clinging. It's the practice of pausing before speaking, breathing before deciding, and allowing silence to precede movement. Individuation is not about transcending humanity. It's about humanizing divinity within you, bringing spirit into matter through your daily choices. And eventually, the journey leads to legacy. This doesn't mean fame or recognition. It means embodiment. To leave a legacy is to live as a bridge between the inner and the outer world, to let the soul leave fingerprints on the material. It could be through art, kindness, presence, or even the quiet way you forgive. The individuated person doesn't preach. They emanate. They live from the inside out. Their life itself becomes a message that says, it is possible to be whole. Each stage of this process reunites what has long been divided. The human and the divine, the conscious and the unconscious, the wound and the wisdom. Individuation is both descent and ascent. It requires courage to face your depths and humility to let something larger than you take the lead. It's not about reaching enlightenment. It's about remembering that the light was never lost. And so, the dream becomes your teacher, the symptom becomes your guide, and the silence becomes your sanctuary. The same forces that once felt like chaos begin to organize themselves into meaning. You start to see the thread that connects your past pain to your present purpose. But even in this sacred process, the path is not without danger. For every seeker who begins to awaken, there are temptations disguised as truth, illusions that can pull you away from the real work of the soul. Because where there is light, shadow follows, and the journey is about to reveal both. Spiritual growth is not a straight line. It spirals, circles back, descends before it rises. Jung knew this well, which is why he warned about one of the most seductive dangers on the path, the moment when the ego disguises itself as enlightenment. He called it being inflated with the divine, that subtle and intoxicating state where the ego starts to mistake connection for control, wisdom for superiority, presence for perfection. The light of the self touches the conscious mind, and instead of bowing, the ego tries to wear it like a crown. At first, it feels empowering. You begin to understand things others don't. You feel more awake, more aware, more in tune. But slowly, the sacred becomes personal property, and spirituality becomes performance. The ego whispers, I've transcended what others are still struggling with. That's the first trap, the spiritual inflation. It's when the search for truth turns into the search for validation, when humility dissolves into hierarchy. You stop being a student of mystery and start acting like its gatekeeper. But what's truly divine never divides, it humbles. Real awakening doesn't make you superior, it makes you softer. Then comes the second trap, the mystical isolation. It's a tendency to withdraw completely from life, believing that detachment equals purity. You start to mistake avoidance for peace. You retreat from relationships, responsibilities, and even joy, thinking that the soul must remain untouched by the ordinary. But Jung reminded us that individuation is not about escaping the world. It's about incarnating within it. To be whole is to hold both spirit and soil, to meditate in the morning, and still show up for the messiness of human love in the afternoon. The soul didn't come here to hide. It came here to participate. The third danger is the savior complex. the desire to heal others before healing yourself. You see pain everywhere and feel called to fix it, not realizing that the impulse often masks your own unintegrated wounds. The archetype of the healer is powerful, but when possessed by it, you start to believe that other people's salvation is your responsibility. Jung wrote that the right way to wholeness is full of fateful detours and wrong turnings. One of those detours is trying to guide others toward light while refusing to enter your own darkness. True service is born from integration, not from avoidance. Until you face your own shadow, your light will always blind someone. And then there's a regression, the quiet temptation to retreat into the safety of who you once were. When transformation becomes too demanding, the psyche longs for the comfort of the familiar. You start romanticizing the past. Old beliefs, old patterns, old versions of yourself that felt simpler. But this nostalgia is not love. It's fear disguised as tenderness. The past is meant to be honored, not re-inhabited. Growth requires staying present with what's uncomfortable, not escaping into what's already known. Each of these traps is just another mask of the ego, a clever attempt to reclaim the throne it once held. It knows how to speak the language of the soul without embodying its truth. It quotes wisdom but resists surrender. It prays for peace while secretly craving control. That's why Jung insisted that individuation is not a conquest but surrender. You don't climb your way to wholeness, you dissolve into it. You don't reach the self. You remember that you already were it long before you began searching. And this remembrance is humility in its purest form. It's the awareness that no matter how much you know, you are still a participant in something greater. It's realizing that every insight is borrowed light, every revelation a gift from the same source that animates everyone else. You're not here to become divine. You're here to let the divine move through your humanity. Because when that surrender happens, when the ego finally kneels and the soul takes its rightful place at the center, something extraordinary awakens within you. It's not a vision or a miracle. It's the quiet, unwavering realization that you were never separate from the sacred at all. In the end, the soul was never asking you to be perfect. It was asking you to be whole. Perfection is sterile, lifeless. Wholeness is alive, messy, radiant with contradiction. To be whole is to hold your light and your shadow in the same embrace. To see that even the parts you once condemned were only trying to protect you. When the ego finally bows, the self begins to bloom, not as something new, but as something ancient finally remembered. The noise fades and what remains is presence. You start to see how everything you once cursed was quietly conspiring for your evolution. Every rejection that felt like punishment was redirection. Every ending was a doorway, disguised as loss. The people who triggered you were mirrors, showing you where love still needed to be learned. The pauses, the breakdowns, the moments of silence between one life chapter and the next. They weren't empty, they were gestations. Life was never random. It was symbolic, written in the same sacred language your dreams have always spoken. You simply needed to remember how to read it. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health." The struggles are not interruptions to your path. They are the path. They burn away the false layers so that what is indestructible and you can emerge. Pain becomes purification. Chaos becomes creation. You realize that the self was never hiding. It was shaping you through contrast, calling you to grow roots in places where you once only reached for wings. The transformation doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds slowly, like dawn after a long night. You begin to live differently, not from fear, but from faith. You speak with more silence, love with more patience, move with more intention. The same world remains, but your perception changes. You stop seeking signs because life itself has become the sign. You no longer chase purpose. You embody it. What you were searching for was never outside. It was the awareness watching from within. And so, what your soul knew before you came here begins to reveal itself in your daily life. It doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives with clarity. You recognize meaning in the smallest moments. A stranger's kindness, a sudden breeze, a forgotten memory that returns like light through an old window. The veil of forgetting lifts, and behind it you see the quiet architecture of your destiny. Every detour, every delay, Every heartbreak was sacred preparation for this moment of recognition. The soul was never lost. It was guiding you home to the labyrinth of your own becoming. The realization comes softly but powerfully. You are not becoming. You are remembering. Remembering the calm beneath your chaos, the love beneath your fear, the wholeness beneath your wounds. The journey was never about becoming someone else. It was about shedding everything that isn't you. What returns is not a new identity, but your original one, the awareness that has always been silently observing, waiting, loving. And from that stillness, life begins to feel holy again. Ordinary moments glow with meaning. You look at the people around you and see souls instead of roles. You stop searching for heaven because you found it right here in the simple miracle of being awake inside your own existence. You are not becoming. You are remembering. Comment below, I choose to remember my soul.